Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Infopedia, the world's #1 information podcast. I'm your co-host, Craige2.
I'm Frankie.
And I'm Teafed.
Today's episode is on the amazing One ZOS, a gaming console so controversial and futuristic that many people forgot that they never even played it.
So a little housekeeping before we move on to the rest of the episode. Podcast Village, as we've established, has been complete. We are adding a few little bits and baubles here. We were able to get in touch with St. Jones, and he is actually relinquishing the blueprints to Mr. Jones's Wild Ride. So we will have the first ever clone of Mr. Jones' Wild Ride on Podcast Village soil for any and all citizens to enjoy as long as they are putting in the hours and labor on the weekends.
Thanks to all Infopedians who made St. Jones aware of our cause. We're super thankful for everything that his precious hands have touched.
One of the things I'd like to address, maybe less on a positive note, but as we go into our fourth month of full-time podcast production here at the Podcast Village, we've noticed a lot of phenomena that have been occurring that have been reported by podcasters. I just want to clear the air a little bit here, because I know that it's a lot of people speaking the truth. It's a lot of people in one place really delving into the depths of their mind to find the facts that are so hard and elusive to discover. As we've observed in the past, it can actually have material effects on the world around us. So let's not try to get too superstitious. Let's not try to jump to conclusions about this, and make sure that under all circumstances you are podcasting. Okay, I want to make this emphatically clear. You have to podcast. This is not a game. If you can't podcast, you need to leave. Thanks, everyone.
Moving on to our sponsor, Game Facts or Game FAQs. Are they both right? I can't tell you.
I could, yes.
So they are both right? I never really knew.
It's sort of a superposition sort of deal, where it depends on the observer, but it's one definitive definition that is changing depending on who's looking at it. It's very complicated. But GameFAQs has reached out to us with a large sum of money. Not quite enough, but large enough to get a mention on the podcast. It'll be very short compared to other ads because they were stingy, let's face it. But they need more people. People writing game guides into little text files with ASCII art and descriptions of how to play the game. Now, this has become precipitously difficult as live service games have entered the market and new metagames are constantly evolving, and people want hypertext and links and videos explaining things. But at GameFAQs, they're all about good old-fashioned text and ASCII art. So if that sounds like something that you find appealing, and you're not, let me emphasize this, you're not working on a podcast, then go ahead on to GameFAQs.com, where you can sign up today and start making your little text files.
It looks like there's a special bullet point here. If anybody, they're looking for people to completely rewrite the Magic the Gathering walkthrough on how to win every single game of Magic the Gathering you could ever play, statistically or otherwise. So if anyone has information about that, I would run, not walk, to the email and email them.
Yeah, that guide is highly incomplete. At the last time I checked it, which was about a year ago, they were up to about second edition, and they had permuted through every single combination of a 60 card deck plus 15 card sideboard that you could make in the game, and then all of the possible opening hands you could have drawn on either side of the whether you're playing or you're the opponent or you're the regular person who is supposed to win. But unfortunately, they were not able to create a foolproof system for winning every single game due to, non-deterministic aspects of the game, like shuffling, which is actually still deterministic because when you think about it, there's only so many ways you can shuffle the deck. So really, it's as many different permutations as there are cards in a 60 card deck plus 15 card sideboard, plus the number of different times you can shuffle times the amount of different ways you can shuffle. So the text file was approximately 4.8 terabytes in size by the time that they reached about 30% of the permutations that were possible. And that's just not really acceptable, especially considering that it's not really like an indexed, something that you can search, but rather just a monolithic text file. So yeah, if anyone thinks that's like a really good idea that they want to contribute to, and they're not working on a podcast, go ahead, and because whatever they want is what we have to say.
Thank you again to GameFAQs for this episode of having it be sponsored by them. On to the main show.
I'm sure most of you have heard of the 1ZOS, but for those of you who haven't heard of the 1ZOS, allow me to explain. So it's kind of like it's not a normal game system.
How so?
Well, as because you would call it 1ZGS, it's not a game system, so that's why we call it 1ZOS. And that stands for organ system, which means that the game console itself was a sort of biological being that was grown in Mitsubishi laboratories. Nintendo had just come out with their famous Super Mario and all that. And some other companies were peering their eyes to what the new hip young guys at Nintendo were doing. So they were like, well, they can make one, we can also make one, and thus it was. But the problem was that they wanted to make it purely or made of organic material, as a sort of like health emphasis or health benefit sort of deal. And that's the original conception behind the idea.
Yes, 1ZOS was a contemporaneous competitor to the Super Nintendo. So it would have been around 1991 it was a Japanese, Mitsubishi is Japanese, so it was in Japan where they did release it. It was not just Mitsubishi, but they had a sort of a collaboration with a biotech company whose name was redacted, and whose name was redacted for their terrible alleged war crimes in the former Yugoslavia. So yes, so the idea was it was actually kind of ahead of its time, this whole push to be more organic. We didn't really see sort of the buzzword of organic really released into the market until maybe the mid-2000s. So yes, Mitsubishi and redacted organics were very ahead of their time.
Much like the organic food we get in the grocery store, which is regular food, but they do it different. They grow it with a different amount of things that makes it better and healthier. The 1ZOS was grown in a laboratory that was specifically made for manufacturing artificial human organs, including nerves, stomachs, hearts, ligaments, joints, bones. If you name it, they made it. For one reason or another, they could not accomplish the number one goal of what was on Mitsubishi's radar at the time, which was creating a full human artificial creation. This violated many ethical principles that people at the time held, which obviously times have changed. We're a lot more, I don't want to say the big W four-letter word here, but we're a little bit different nowadays. But in any case, the actual issue had nothing to do with the ethics. It was the fact that a human soul can't be manufactured. It can only be conceived through sexual intercourse between two human beings of any gender, which would be later discovered in the 2010s. So one of the main draws of this technology was that although it couldn't actually have its own soul, think for itself, you could put artificial memories, basically like behaviors into this brain and central nervous system that was distributed throughout this device. And then through skin-to-skin contact, another user could experience sensory information taken directly off of the nervous system of the onesie OS. The onesie OS got its name from the phenomena in the United States of the onesie, which is more of a article of clothing than a phenomena, I suppose. But it was something that only came into being in the late 1980s, whereas before all clothing had to be segmented, the onesie was usually like a fleece article of clothing that was basically stepped into and enveloped the user's arms, legs, and sometimes had a hood, perhaps a poop flap in the back, depending on what the kind of model was, or if you were like sick nasty like that. But in any case, the onesie OS was basically a device you would step inside of. This had a lot of interesting characteristics in terms of its use case, especially compared to most video game systems where you're just holding a controller. In this case, because it was contacting with you, it had to make a connection to your nerves through your skin, and most dry physical mediums were not really capable of doing that. And I think that Teafed can kind of explain the consequences of this the best.
Sorry, I zoned out. Where are we?
You're going to explain how wet the onesie OS was.
Oh, okay. The development of onesie OS. Right in the heart of the Mitsubishi Gaming company in Tokyo, Japan. The onesie came into being through the thoughts of one being Satoshi Nakamura, who was a Japanese man living in Tokyo in 1991. His problem was that this new proliferation of like digital electronic technology was taking over the country at this point. I mean, Japan had invested basically 100% of their workforce to either developing electronics or assisting in developing electronics or doing something unrelated.
That's correct.
And he loved that little spark that you get when you make eye contact with another person. That's not something that you can replicate with the pixels on a screen, except maybe you can. I don't know how you understand the world, but Satoshi Nakamura certainly didn't. Or, well, maybe he did.
There was another part of the psychology, if you will, of Satoshi Nakamura that we would be remiss if we did not mention that for the first 25 years of his life, he was in solitary confinement. He was born there through no fault of his own, through a sort of administrative mistake. He was left in solitary confinement and grew up that way, therefore never having known the touch of another human. This followed him and had intense psychical repercussions on the way that he viewed the world. And in a post-war era of Japan, in which things are being rapidly industrialized, he took it personally. And while he didn't think that it was a good idea to not advance at all technologically, he thought that there could be perhaps a middle path, like perhaps a Buddha would maybe say, that you could have both the touch of maybe not a human, but you could have that sort of skin contact and be able to do lots of computations, So the original idea wasn't even in the sense of an entertainment system as much as it was just an operating system. But so that's where OS can also mean. So it can mean organ system, but it is ostensibly an operating system. Much like your organs are a way for you to operate in the world.
Satoshi was a very normal person, considering how little interaction he was able to achieve during his life. He was able to teach himself Japanese at the age of 6 without the use of any instruction, books, resources, media at all. It, in his own words, translated to English, it came to me in a dream. And that same dream would cause him to give birth to one of the world's most awkward and strange non-computer entertainment, living computer system entertainment toy for little boys and little girls and everyone in between. But the 1Z OS wasn't without its challenges. The 1Z OS's development was mired in a lot of skepticism, a lot of painful experimentation. There was many protesters who were basically hired by Nintendo to, synthesize an ethical issue that really wasn't there to begin with, which was the fact that the seed sort of stem cells that were being used to generate the organs for the 1Z OS had to be harvested from children with broken toys. It was a very painful experience because in Japan, having broken toys is one of the worst fates that a child can endure. And so it was a very hot button topic for many Japanese people at the time. But it was assured to the Japanese public that the children from whom the stem cells were harvested from, mostly from their brains and their eyes, were given a proper amount of anesthesia and were given care afterwards before they were returned to the streets from which they were acquired. But in any case, the 1Z OS, the 1Z based operating system, had one other fatal issue, which was that it is wet. The suit is made of a pinkish, whitish flesh. On the outside, it appears as if it is the skin of a very thinly haired sheep, but on the inside, it secretes a sort of mucus-like enzyme that allows it to interface with the human nervous system of the pilot, or rather the wearer, more easily than a dry medium would. And this would create a situation in which a person using the 1Z OS for basically any amount of time over 30 seconds would leave them entirely enveloped in a layer of extremely viscous and sometimes, depending on the diet of the suit itself, caustic coating, which could damage the skin of the user. This would be later patched in later iterations. After the first couple deaths, they managed to turn down they turned the dial that made the goo bad and made goo good, so happy and it didn't hurt.
So how exactly did the 1Z OS sort of project a gaming environment into the user, the gamer?
Great question, Teafed. So if you were a user or pilot of the 1Z OS, this is kind of what it would be like to be the pilot. You would, 1 foot at a time, just like the rest of you. 1 foot at a time, step into the sheepskin. It would sort of be a little bit too big for basically everyone, but then there's kind of a button that you press on the wrist and it like shrink wraps to you, like just sucks everything in. So you're really hugged really warmly and tightly by the 1Z OS. There is then a sort of suction goggles that appear over your eyes. Just to kind of, what they're trying to do is basically block out any real external stimuli and just completely replace it with the gaming system itself. And so the idea is that you're completely immersed into this biofantastical, system and potentially a narrative. What then occurs is a synthesis of sensory input and sensory decoding, in which games are directly injected into your eyes and brain. And the other thing is that they have to kind of connect directly to the spinal cord as well, because similar to when you fall asleep, there's a mechanism that paralyzes all of your muscles so that you don't act out your dreams in your sleep. A very similar system is implemented here, such that you don't, knock over your grandmother's vase while you're just trying to play a game. like how embarrassing would that be? They had to figure that one out the hard way in the game testing. So, but yeah, there is a range of games, from first-person shooters to platformers to action adventure games, where you just play like a little guy, a little cat who's just running around. So that's kind of one of my more favorite games. It's actually called Kitty Kibble. So it's really good. And look, it's just, you have to leave it to see it. So
one of the things that that put off a lot of people, speaking of the interface of the system, one of the things that made it kind of like unpopular is the fact that you did have to like fully undress before using the gaming system. Like, it didn't really work with clothes, so like in a social aspect, it was just kind of awkward for a lot of people. I mean, not for everyone, I'm sure, but for most people, it was like kind of weird because you had to hey, Crage 2, do you want to come play 1ZOS with me? And it's like, what am I going to undress in front of you?
I would have said it doesn't matter. So let's talk about the games. As Frankie mentioned, the 1ZOS was home to many first-person shooters, but it was also home to a new genre of game, the second-person shooter. A second-person shooter game was really never adopted by any other console, just due to the fact that the 1ZOS nervous system interface allowed the user to see themselves outside of their own body. So in the same way that a game like Resident Evil uses a fixed camera position, that could be, sort of interpreted as an observer who is, or maybe on like a CCT watching the player navigate through Spencer Manor. A second-person shooter is a game in which the person who is doing the shooting is being observed by a different person. Another crucial detail that was very hard to explain at the time was that the 1ZOS doesn't have a screen or a controller, and it doesn't necessarily allow the user to move. In general, the user would either be sitting or standing once the game was loaded up. And there isn't necessarily a good way of describing this, because much like a dream, once you've had the dream, you might be able to remember the sequence of events that happened during the dream, but it's a very fleeting experience. It quickly dissolves as you return to the world of the waking. And many people would describe the 1ZOS as essentially imbuing them with memories of another life and giving them some degree of lucidity to make controls in order to have something that resembles a game. But in order to fully describe the way that the 1ZOS worked would require something a little bit more metaphysical and difficult to describe. I think I might have already kind of said that, but I don't need to second guess myself, I guess. This made it impossible to understand what someone was doing while playing 1ZOS. In traditional games, if your friend is playing the Nintendo Entertainment System, they can see Mario Man do a little jump and a little run through and all around the Mushroom Kingdom. But from the perspective of someone watching someone play 1ZOS, maybe you would hear a groaning, sort of slowly moving person wrapped in a flesh suit, which doesn't necessarily drive the experience home. It was really the rave reviews from not necessarily its target demographic that made it so impactful.
If you were to go to any nursing home in America, Mexico, or Canada right now, there's a high likelihood that you'll find the 1ZOS placed in the center of an empty room. This is the 1ZOS was super popular with fascinatingly everyone except for like gamers. Like if you're like really getting into games and stuff, the chances are the 1ZOS is probably not for you. But for everyone else, they had an absolute blast in their flesh suits. Places like nursing homes, daycares. I saw that someone tried to set one up at a dog park, and I don't remember if it worked, but like that's such a good idea.
It's interesting the reason behind why it was so well received amongst the elderly and the infant demographics. And that is because it also offers a sensory component that cannot be found within other game systems simply because of its biological interfacing. It offers, traditional game systems offer simply sight and sound. It's a 2 sensory experience. This is a 5, potentially 6 sensory experience, depending on what you consider to be our senses as humans. So you have with the onesie, you're also susceptible to pain and pleasure, but you do feel every blow. You do feel every sting. Every hammer that comes down on you. No matter what game it is, like there will be. Pain is kind of a guarantee for whatever the game is. So, why would an infant be drawn to that? Because infants are looking for new experiences, good or bad. They're just trying to learn. It's kind of like when we've all stuck our hand on the stove for the first time. And we learned, right? And then there's some people who like pain, which is, well, that's a whole other episode too, but conversely, with an older demographic, there's a potentially, depending on ability, could be a loss of sensitivity in some key areas of the body, if you know what I mean. So the games that came out for the Onesie OS system, the first release was Farmville Onesie, which was a sort of idle farming game where you could grow all sorts of crops, from the elusive edamame pea to the wonderful and beautiful maize. So there was Farmville Onesie. There was also Baseball Onesie, Chuck Tosser's Knuckleball 1986, Snapchat, which was more of a rudimentary chat system between Onesie OS systems. So you wouldn't have to be in the same exact vicinity as a friend. You could be in different parts of the room or even different parts of the city and still be able to talk to your friend. There's Pets Onesie, which you could, have a little virtual pet. I did have that game. I actually had a pet rock in Pets Onesie. That was one of the things that you could have in there. Plock Ultimatum, real chess as opposed to fictional chess, which we do not have time to get into. Chuck Tosser's Bench Bowl 1987, not to be confused with Chuck Tosser's Knuckleball 1986. The Bench Bowl has a special game function in which you could try out and propose different sorts of legislation to, again, potentially arm the runner with a firearm, give them skills in jiu-jitsu, sort of create obstacles for the runner, create more paywalls for the throwers. There are all sorts of features that in the 1987 game that were not implemented in the 1986 game. I think it's very important that we keep those in mind.
Personally, as an avid Onesie OS skeptic turned fan, I have to say that real chess really knocks it out of the park, because I think that most of the games that they tried to market for the Onesie OS were very death-oriented. They were very visceral and painful experiences, but real chess sort of reached into the historical context of a very famous game, because many people don't know this, but chess, which is a classic featuring pawns, knights, bishops, horses, rooks, queens, and kings, was actually based on a real place called Chess, which was just like a regular old town. Nothing that special. No kings, no queens, no bishops, no knights. Just a lot of imagination. And when I played that game, I remember exactly where I was in the game, which was chess. And I was interacting with villagers. They were telling me where I could find rare water and special food. And every time you would eat a special food, you would have a new memory. So I'd like to think that the real chess game was probably one of the only computer games that wasn't even made for a computer, and that's what makes it my pick of the month.
I actually met my first wife on Snapchat. I sort of Yeah, no, it was a whole. It was really, as terrible as she was, she had a really good taste in skins for her avatar, and that's kind of what we sort of drew each other to each other, and a violent and passionate relationship formulated within and without the clutches of the onesie. But that's that's all in the past. So.
Growing up, my favorite game was Banjo 3, which was released for the 1Z in 2005. That's all I love Banjo-Kazooie.
The problem I had with Banjo 3E was that without the use of a controller or the ability to have graphics, it was very esoteric where Banjo and Kazooie were at any time in the hills of the Spiral Mountains. I think that the banjo and goofy music that was composed by none other than Edward was not true. Was sort of artificially difficult to listen to because of the hyper and subsonic frequencies that were used, as opposed to our normal 12-tone scale that ranges from approximately, sounds occurring between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. Instead, we had infrasonic fractional hertz sounds coupled with ultrasonic 30 plus kilohertz sounds, which, while not audible, are physically very painful. But also, I kind of got to give them a little bit of credit because no one really tried that before. And as far as I'm concerned, by just getting it out of the way, it's kind of like a John Cage situation where like no one is dumb enough to make music this bad because we already did it once. It's kind of like you get the joke. It's like a joke artist and I feel like that's kind of a beautiful thing. I think we're too often bogged down by the fact that we want things to actually resonate or speak to people or represent something inherently instead of having to have think pieces written about it. But we can't all be winners. And in the world full of losers, I think it's about time we punch up a little bit.
I would like to strike what I said about Snapchat and my first wife off the record. It's a little too embarrassing. I'd rather talk about my other best favorite game for the 1ZOS. It was called Chrono Cross. It was a spiritual successor to the very popular game Chrono Trigger that did not come out for the 1ZOS, but the Chrono Cross had one of the best game soundtracks of all time and is one of probably the more stinkier, smellier games to be released for the 1ZOS because there was a lot of like swamp and bog based levels, and there was a lot of not only bog but dog based levels and like there's a lot of wetness, like again, so like the 1ZOS, it permeated not only the hard and wetware itself, but often a lot of the games would kind of pick up on a more wet environment, whether they meant to or not. And one of the companions that you could have for Chrono Cross was Rosie, the wet dog, who was continuously wet. And the stench was really something a force to be reckoned with. And I'll never forget the times that I've spent with Rosie.
So we actually have a very interesting segment to show you guys. This is a piece of lost media, a recovered piece of audio from E2, where the 1ZOS was being unveiled by Mitsubishi Electronics for the first time. E2 is, of course, the precursor to E3, which would come the year after, and incidentally, every year after this, because the indexing stopped after E3 because they found that it was a nicer acronym, because originally it was just called Entertainment. So let's go ahead and roll the clip.
Teafed load media E2 date 1990.
Hello everybody, my name is Dr. Maximillian Bettersworth. I was one of the lead developers for 1ZOS. I was actually one of the two founders. I worked with Satoshi for many years, and I know you guys are very curious about my involvement with this project, so I'm ready to delve into the history, and then I'll answer some questions. So before anybody asks, the 1ZOS does not cause any kind of lasting injury or bodily damage. It may cause some damage when you're removing the plungers from your eyes. I believe that actually might help people who are, I believe, farsighted, because it kind of stretches their eyes out. We tested it on a lot of animals, and they're giving their thumbs up of approval in our direction. So it may be painful to dislocate the nerves from your body. The ones of us as nerves, you attack them to your body. There's a little stinging feeling. There might be some holes, but eventually you will form scars and you'll be okay. I would like to start by going into the history of 1ZOS before I take questions. I know a lot of people were curious about my involvement, being that I was one of the only 2 people working on it in the very beginning. So I was one of the lead developers for 1ZOS. It was quite a radical shift in my career simply because I'm used to working on technology that doesn't have a beating heart. So it was quite different for me. I got my degree in computer science in the 70s, and let's just say there weren't a lot of flesh and blood bodies in the department that I was at. It was actually mostly just me. I met Satoshi when I visited Japan because I had watched the movie, what is it called, Akira? And I was so inspired by anime that I just had to go to Japan. And what essentially happened was I met Satoshi at an anime convention. He was actually learning how to socialize for the first time. And he figured that the people at the convention were socially awkward enough so that, he wouldn't feel very judged. And let's just say when I met him, I really didn't judge him. He was quite chill guy. And, this is before I knew about his upbringing. So I just thought he was a perfectly normal dude. He was a bit quiet. But anyways, I said hello to him. We sat down, we got drinks, and he started telling me about this really cool idea he had, the 1ZOS. I don't know where he got the money, but he managed to get his hand on a bioreactor. And if you guys know, bioreactors are very, very expensive. So anyways, I ended up working for him, and that was the first time I ever ended up touching human flesh. Anyways, the first prototype of 1ZOS was quite special to me. So I used to work originally with visual and physics servers. That's what I did. I developed very rudimentary versions of this, and it was pretty difficult to replicate this using neurons grown from rat stem cells. But we were eventually able to accomplish this. The occipital lobes we used for the visual servers, and the parietal lobes we used for the physics servers. And I think it all worked out pretty darn well. I also had to learn how to sew. That was fun. Anyways, so I would like to turn to the crowd, and you guys can give me questions. I have a lot of inside knowledge, and I'm ready to spill.
Hello, Maximillian Bettersworth. This is Sandra Clay of the United States Biological Society of Biologists. Our organization has classified your experiments as a potential biological terrorism disaster. If this were to release, it could endanger perhaps millions of people. What do you have to say about these allegations?
I just say they're wrong. I understand that we have a competitor that has got some inside information into our project, and they want to be able to get to the market first. And they do fund your organization. I'm very aware of that. And I'm not going to take any of these bad questions. Biological terrorism, who are we hurting? At this stage, it's mostly just rats. And the country we're doing research in, that is not unethical. So I don't know what to tell you. If you're so upset about this problem, I do understand how some people might feel pretty bad about this. I do want to say that the DOS-silent agents that we use for the computers are the same as the ones we use on the rats. So they don't experience too much pain, or at least they don't express it. But anything that would harm humans, that's absolutely ridiculous. But I will at least say that we have taken every precaution possible with the 1ZOS's interaction with any kind of human tissues. And everything is up to par. And so that's pretty much what I'm going to say. If anybody else has slanderous questions, you're going to get the same kind of treatment from me because, we're not going to let our competitors win.
I
This question is for Maximillian Bettersworth. Hi, my name's Matthew, and I'm an aspiring coder, and I just wanted to know, how is it that you could put a lines of code into a guide or into a skin and to make it to have a game, to love and to hold?
Well, I'm not sure about love. There wasn't a lot of love involved. But I would say that it was actually one of the greatest difficulties when starting the project because we didn't have a lot to go off of at the time. A lot of this technology was very new, incredibly experimental, and quite frankly illegal. I think it was quite the undertaking because we had to try to, we started off with rat neurons before we moved on to human neurons. We were taking rat neurons and we were kind of super gluing them. That's how I'm going to phrase it. We were using a special kind of biological glue, but it's essentially like connective tissue to stick the neurons to computer chips and then trying to interface them. We were concerned that we would make the computers conscious in some way. We didn't want the computers to have any strong emotions about what was going on. And so not only did we have to inject the biological parts with medications that would make them docile, but we also had to inject the computer chips, and it was really hard to get the syringes past the plastic parts. So anyways, I don't know if that answers your question at all.
Thank you.
Hey, so I was thinking about the whole, like, the game with where it's like alive. I was talking to my friend Steve earlier, and he was telling me that, like, his buddy was in Alaska in the army, and, like, he got, like, he was running really fast, and then he got sweaty, and so he took his clothes off, and then he got hypothermia, and so he actually died, and they, like, revived him. And he asked him what it felt like, and he said he couldn't remember. I was thinking, because, like, I've never died, so I don't know, like, what it would, how would I know, like, how does the game know what it's like to die?
Well, you will definitely remember dying in 1ZOS. That's definitely going to be a feature. I really hope that you don't think you're just going to forget the best part of the gaming experience. So if that's your complaint, don't worry, you will remember the entire process of dying while playing a game. The plans at the moment, because we want it to be as realistic as possible, is that you will experience a lot of pain and go unconscious, but you will eventually wake up, we hope. So graphically, it's sort of similar to like when you dream at night, and the dreams look real, but something's kind of off. So all the graphics are going to be quite like that. The feeling of death, I imagine, if you've ever died in a dream, it will feel much like that. But you won't actually die.
One more thing, my stepdaughter Samantha, she's like 6. Are we cool? Will she fit? And is it cool? Can she play too?
She can totally play. In fact, we actually recommend that young kids play games with death in it so that they can experience it early on. It's a lot harder to accept the grief of death when you become an adult, but if you start when you're a child, then dealing with it is a lot easier as you get older. So
right, it's like a preview for like when grandma kicks the butt.
Exactly, right. I know back in the days, a lot of people would poison their pet dogs in order to have their kids experience death, but here you can do it without killing anything but your mental health.
Oh, that's tight. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, Gerard Simone, American Ambassador for Planned Parenthood Japan. With the declining birth rate of Japan, is there any possibility that my 1ZOS can get pregnant or get me pregnant?
Well, the answer to this is no in the literal sense, but we do have a lot of games revolving around simulating the experience of pregnancy. I know a lot of people would like to know what it's like to be pregnant, and I know there is an easier way to do this and a cheaper way, but sometimes people just want to pay a lot of money to have the deluxe version. And with our version of simulated pregnancy, you can get pregnant with whatever you like in whatever way you like for how long as you like, So let's say you want to experience being pregnant with a baby giraffe. you can know what that's like, and you can know how horrible it is to have the hooves of a baby giraffe kick you in the belly from the inside. I know that's an experience a lot of people would like to know about. It's like a way of expressing your personality, so.
Hi, this is George Thompson, the gamer of Nebraska. The fact that your release title is Farmville 1Z is a disgrace to all gamers across the globe. This is casual. This is not fun. This sucks. I don't like it. I don't want Farmville on my 1Z OS. I want Counter-Strike.
Well, I do understand that there are people who worked on a development team that have leaked a lot of information about the game developers that are working with us, and I feel quite terrible that everybody found out about our involvement with Farmville, because we actually decided to stop working with them because the person who was in contact with our team, let's just say they don't know how to use a phone. So we decided to not go with that. In terms of Counter-Strike, it won't be Counter-Strike specifically. It will be Halo Infinite, which I know everybody loved, the one that came out on the NES. I know it was a very mixed reception game, but we hope to take the aspects of that involve getting shot and really implementing that into the kind of sensory biofeedback of the 1Z OS. The big selling point for our platform is realism. You're not just playing a shooter game on like a platformer, but you're actually jumping on the platforms and you're actually holding the weapon and you're actually shooting, right? Because video games like that only exist in the arcades, right? Not in your 1Z. So I really hope that appeals to the kind of gaming audience that's into more of that hardcore experience, because I can't imagine there being anything more hardcore than feeling like you're actually getting shot by giant 8-bit bullets.
Hi, Max. My name's Ivy. I am one of the hosts on the What the podcast. We cover some of these, I don't know what you would call it, but abnormalities going on in our world right now. We're not really sure. There's a lot of strange things that have been happening. And some of the things we notice, some of the patterns we notice have been going on with the release of the 1Z. I just wanted to ask you, did you ever feel like in development of the 1Z you felt like, events were preordained for you? You didn't have control over your own body?
Well, I mean, of course I didn't have control, because the 1Z OS is a biological game console that is interfacing with your nervous system. As in regards to something paranormal, I mean, how would I be able to tell the difference between the 1Z OS controlling my body because it's programmed to versus a glitch versus a paranormal phenomenon? I don't see how I would be able to tell the difference. If it were glitching, then I would honestly have just blamed it on the computer software. I wouldn't even thought of paranormal activity. That seems absurd.
And another amazing clip that our infopedians were able to dig up from beyond time and space. A lot of temporal anomalies coming our way, as you can see from the charts. Now, despite all of the skepticism surrounding the 1Z OS, it went on to be the #1 selling product of human history, selling over 100 copies in over 100 countries across the globe, creating a global phenomena that can only be described as a global phenomena. One more detail that I wanted to point out about the 1Z OS was that while it did enjoy a very, very lucrative 7-month lifespan when games were being released for it, the reason why they stopped manufacturing it in 1992 was that there was an excess of people urinating into the 1Z OS, and as a sort of a collective telepathic hive mind,
Sorry. Someone put pepper in my 1Z OS.
As a sort of a telepathic as a telepathic console, The other onesie OSs started being voracious urine drinkers, and this created a sort of an unfit situation, unsanitary situation, as the onesie OS would often perform urethral sounding to reach the sort of like a organic catheter to reach into the user to obtain their urine without really consenting with the user at all. And this created the hygiene issue, because usually if you urinate or any other bodily fluids enter the onesie OS, you need to clean it and yourself. But because the users weren't aware of it, they would spend hours in the onesie OS basically experiencing septic shock. And fortunately, because the onesie OS's memory only has a half-life of about 11 years, after about 11 years in the year of 2012, the onesie OSs were deemed safe because they had forgotten the flavor and the experience of urine, which allowed more people to go back and play the classic games once again. What's old is new, and retro is back on the menu.
Oh yeah, sponsor. Thanks again to GameFAQs for sponsoring this episode. Please go to their website and submit as many text documents as you can. If you're lucky, they'll hire you and pay you for the work that you do afterwards. With more, when you make more of them, I think is how it works. So yeah, that's cool.
And now it's time for a little segment we like to call reading mail that people took the time out of their hard-earned day and money to buy stamps and write on a stationery with letterhead or decorations.
This is your mail, everyone. I hope you're like so excited and really okay.
So this letter comes to us from Julian Janes from New York. They say, "Hey crew, who is this Crage that Crage 2 asks about when talking about Frankie's third honeymoon in the Shark Week episode?" Well, Julian Janes from New York, let me put this down. Well, Julian Janes from New York, I'm so glad you asked. Sometimes in the world there can be only with one name per guy. So when you have multiple guy with same name, you as a mother have to specify 2, 3, however many there are in the world. Add one more to increment, tack it on to the end of the name. So Crage, my current spouse and Crage 2 are different people. They are twins. So, that's where maybe some of this confusion comes from. Crage's mother, rest her soul, wasn't very good at naming her children. And so when she discovered that she would be having twins instead of one person, she couldn't think of any more names. So she simply named, Crage, my beloved spouse, Crage, and then Crage 2, the sort of runt of the two-person litter, Crage 2.
So that's it's sort of correct under a different sort of pretext where different things are right and different things are wrong. But under the pretext that I experienced, Crage is not my twin. Crage is not another person. Me and Crage are brothers in the same way that the Rastafari refer to each other as I and I, meaning that we're all one. Crage is just another manifestation of the sort of master. Have you ever had kombucha? They make it with yeast, and the yeast comes from a master, and then they can grow more. So that's kind of the shit I was been on, and that's why they made me like that. And we got brothers and sisters all over the place. I have shooters, and if you decide that you don't like what I have to say, let's just say that I won't have to hear about it more than once.
And I also just want to make one thing extremely clear. Crage 2 and I have never dated, never been married. That could never in a million years have ever been the case between us. We're just two different people. It just wouldn't I know a lot of people saying, "Oh, so that's not what's going on here." So please put the fanfic down and let's all just continue to live a normal celibate life.
That's right. I love celibacy.
Well, that's our show. Thank you for listening, and our special thanks to Marimba Utopia for use of their song Explore.
This show was recorded in Podcast Village, California. Infopedia is a TeafedNet production.
I'm Crage too.
I'm Frankie.
And I'm Teafed.
Stay info.